don't want to mix necessarily religion and principles and have religion tell the government what to do. But shouldn't religion form your principles?
Well, that's where you get most of your principles. And great philosophers, Montesquieu and others, said that there is no government that exists that is not founded on some religious principles. It's just which set of religious principles we take. The Founding Fathers had a really good understanding of basic biblical Judeo-Christian principles. We've got a lot of Jewish Founding Fathers, Christian Founding Fathers, all mixed in there together. But they had a real common core that, number one, there is a moral law, and that comes from God. That has become our common law. That's why we say arson and larceny and murder and theft and rape are all wrong, because they're wrong in the Scriptures. That's the moral law, the common law. The next is the judicial law, and that can change over time. You know, in Texas, we used to hang horse thieves. We don't anymore, but it's still wrong to steal horses. And then you finally had your social compact laws, and that's the laws we agree on to govern a society, whether it's sidewalks or traffic tickets or whatever, but you don't compromise the moral laws. And that moral law given by God is what the Declaration called the laws of nature and the laws of the God who created nature.
Then let me go here, because this is something I've gotten a lot of heat for. Taking on churches that talk about social justice. This one is Father Charles Coughlin, who was a Nazi sympathizer in the 1930s. Left. This one is the Post-American. This is from 1972. It has Dick Nixon here. God is an American and Nixon is the president. And this is Jim Wallace's magazine. Who speaks for God? They've always had a problem with this. But now, if you look at what the president is saying, immigration, cap and trade, health care, the debt, all of this is now a moral problem. Anybody want to take on social justice and what they're saying now?
I'll be glad to give it a shot.
Go for it.
Glenn. The first thing, the social justice movement is built upon or predicated on the idea of liberation theology. Liberation theology has its origin or its source in socialism, communism, and Marxism. Marxism and communism is a godless idea. They do not believe in the divine. And so any connection between the Bible and its attempt to do what is called justice and a socialistic frame is like mixing water and fire. They don't mix together. So the idea I think that we're looking at is one that is cloaked in what we call a wolf in sheep's clothing. This is another Jesus and another gospel. This is another theology that does not fit the biblical divine perspective.
Go ahead.
Glenn, you know, when they talk about social justice, of course, we as Christians, we want to be just. The Bible says a great deal about us bringing justice. But social justice has been twisted. And now what we're talking about is Christian charity when we talk about social justice years ago. Christian charity. Christian charity comes from the mercy of God. Today's social justice comes from manipulation of the government. And it's all about power, it's all about control. See, men will always have a God. Every person has a God.
It's money right now for a
lot
of people.
God, yeah. But what's happening is, with the economy, with the welfare state we're living in, with all of these things, what's happening is basically the government's trying to become our God. Yeah. Glenn, and we're in trouble when that happens.
Let me add something to that, because the social justice movement is a resurrection of what was called the social gospel movement of the 1920s. Social gospel movement had two primary guys, the Reverend Harry Ward and the Reverend Reinhold Niebuhr. Those two guys headed two organizations. Reverend Harry Ward was the executive for the ACLU, and Reverend Reinhold Niebuhr was the guy who founded the Americans for Democratic Action, which is the Progressive Socialist Party of today. The problem we have is we have academic studies. They just finished one that looked at 33 foreign nations. In those 33 foreign nations, every time social spending goes up by government, church attendance goes down. So for these guys who say...
It doesn't change your heart.
It doesn't.
That's
it does
the
not.
Point. Isn't that the point of going to church? Is it supposed to change you? I've never felt charitable on April 15th. Not once.
Yeah.
Professor?
I should say a word to my fellow Catholics who may be confused about the critique of social justice that they're hearing here and have heard on your show, because in my tradition, in the Catholic tradition, the concept of social justice has a long history and an honorable history. What it refers to is the fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of common life. But what has happened very often, not all the time, The authorities of the Catholic Church still speak in terms of social justice. The Pope will sometimes speak in terms of social justice. But too often the concept has become corrupted and used as a pretext for advancing what is essentially a social democratic or social welfare or socialist agenda. You see that corruption in exactly the person that you mentioned, Father Coughlin, a Catholic priest who preached during the 1930s. He was originally for the New Deal, and then he turned against the New Deal. But he was very much in sympathy with fascist movements.
Right.
And fascism, of course, was a form of socialism. People forget that today, but it's true. The Nazi movement was National Socialism. It was nationalist, which distinguished it from the communist movement, which was internationalist, but it was socialist. So I think Catholics have to understand that when you or when we are criticizing social justice, we don't mean it in the honorable sense in which it has been used in our tradition. We mean it in the corrupted sense that some people, not all people, use.
Here's the way, and we have to take a break, so I'll just end it here and then we'll come back. Here's the way I define it, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong when we come back. If Jesus is telling you to take your money and give all your money to somebody, go do it. If Jesus tells you to go and take a shovel and build, dig a ditch for somebody, go do it. If the government tells you that you need to dig it for somebody else on your own time, that ain't what I've not found that in the Bible. That's
what else you won't find. Jesus doesn't say, give your money.
Exactly right. Okay, back in just a second. Religious leaders and experts. We're talking about the State of the Union through the prism of religion. We're talking about immigration, cap and trade, healthcare, the debt, our economy, the redistribution of wealth, a global government, Iran, Israel, all of this stuff. And the reason why I wanted to talk to some preachers is George Whitefield. You learned about George Whitefield on this show about a month ago. This guy came before the American Revolution. He had to bring people and open their eyes and say, wait a minute, God is personal. He works through me, and it's an individual thing, and it's not collective salvation. It's up to me to do these things. There needs to be another Whitefield. And so we're talking tonight about the role of faith. And I'd like to throw this out on is it possible that maybe the attendance in our churches is going down because churches don't stand for anything anymore? What they do stand for, I can stay in my sweatpants all Sunday, and just get kind of, well, maybe you should do this, and there is no real right and wrong. Shouldn't we stand for things?
Well, Glenn, I think if you really look at the modern church today, those churches that are standing for the gospel are the ones that are growing.
Right. Yep.
And the ones that have a watered-down message and a social gospel message are shrinking. Now, if you listen to what Robbie George said about Catholic teaching, there was another piece of it, which was subsidiarity, which said that even when you are seeking to ameliorate poverty and help those that have been left behind, you should always do it with the agencies that are closest to the people. Those that are furthest removed, whether it's Sacramento or Washington, aren't able to be as efficient in doing it. Why? Because there isn't a level of accountability. Frederick Tallis was an historian who wrote a famous book called Meeting House and Counting House about colonial America, in which he pointed out that the first libraries, the first hospitals, the first clinics, the first schools and universities were all founded by the churches. And not only did they not see any conflict between their economic institutions and their charitable institutions, but they saw them as inextricably linked. And it was the faith community's celebration of both the creation of wealth and the responsibility of that wealth to care for those who were marginalized that built America.
So John Hagee, you're just like the Cheshire Cat sitting over here. You're just awfully darn quiet, and I know you not to be a quiet man per se. You're a guy who will get up on the pulpit and you will say exactly, like it or not, you'll get up and say exactly what you believe.
I think one of the great problems in the American church is what I often refer to as hot tub Christianity. The purpose is to make people feel good without being good. The whole idea is to explain their sin rather than to confess their sin. and therefore not confessing their sin, there is no transformation from carnality to Christianity. If we as a nation want to return to the principles of the Founding Fathers, George Washington said, "It is not possible to govern without God and the Bible." And that very concept is even out of many churches, because they have the social gospel. They have the design to explain who you think you are rather than who you really are.